So let's kick it off. I'm going to introduce our first guest today. So I have with me Jacqui of Alchemical Cosplay.
Hello, Internet.
She's
How's it
here,
going?
and you can hear her because of the magic of the internet eventually.
Yeah,
So,
pretty
like,
good.
very brief little bit of background for you. So, here's your newscast intro. Jacqui of Alchemical Cosplay specializes in fine sewing and custom drafts patterns to achieve intricate costumes with accurate silhouettes and couture finishing. I can't read anymore. This is what this has done to me. She brings realistic touches and diverse techniques to her work using embroidery, leatherwork, thermoplastics, foams, resins, and electronic systems to bring her cosplay endeavors to life. So, yeah, there's your quick little
Yeah,
intro.
that's about it. All right, then. So I'm ready to roll, I guess. I mean, that's most of it. I did want to tell everyone a little bit more about myself because I have been cosplaying seriously for about 6 years, but sewing and clothing go way back for me from like visual as a baby, like starting to cosplay then. But I sucked at it, but I still loved it. So I went to school for fashion design and got ended up as a handbag designer professionally. So that's kind of why I know so much about leathers. I use it basically all the time. So just a little bit like, why should I listen to this person? Tell me about leather. Because I've been working with it for 12 years and I really like sewing with it. So I'm just going to talk a little bit today about why you might want to use leather in your costumes, the characteristics of it, tips and tricks, and a few of my favorite techniques. So at the end, like William said, we'll have some time for Q&A. So if you save your questions to the end, I'll look at the Twitch chat and get to that. And for now, I'm going to start my screen share. I've got a nerdy slideshow for you all. So we're going to go, oh wait, let me turn this on. Whoop. And then this one, share. Oh dear, hang on. Keynote, there we go. All right, I think you should all see this slideshow now. Can you see a slideshow or web page?
I think we see a web page.
Oh, all right, let me get the web page off. You don't want that yet. Go away, web page. And go away, stickies. Then we want Keynote. Let's resume. Keynote. Play. Resume share. Oh, internet. Why you do?
It plots against us all.
I guess so, right? Right? It's like if I have my Keynote open.
If you're curious, when you're at the actual in-person Cosplay America, we have working sound and video.
Yeah. Oh Lord. I hope so. This is embarrassing.
Oh, you're good. Look, I'm the one who messed up sound forever. So, like, you're doing great. All right, so I see it now.
Do you see my thing, right?
Yeah, I think you'll have to flip it to a different view.
Flip.
There you
How's
go.
that? How's
Nice.
that? Okay,
So I've got
good.
that, and I've got a picture of you in the upper corner. Would you like me to give you full screen?
Of me? Yeah, give me full screen of the presentation. No one needs to see me anymore. Goodbye. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Sewing with leather. What, why, and how you should use leather. Um, so here's the why. It's been used for a really long time. Leather is basically one of the first things that people learn to make clothing out of. So it's really great for costumes because it's been in history forever. So any kind of fantasy inspired armor or garments are, some of them are all leather, some of them are inspired by leather and have them in parts, but you can definitely see the influences of leather garments in costumes and clothes for a very long time. It has a huge range of qualities, textures, finishes, and techniques that are possible. So as much as there are a lot of different types of fabrics and textiles and PU and foam and warbler, there's about that many leathers as well. So I'm going to go over a bit about the main ones and what qualities they have that you may want to use. They're also really customizable. You can paint them, dye them, tool them, emboss them, mold them to be rigid shapes. So there's a ton of different types, and then you can customize them further from there. They have special qualities that other materials don't have. Like you can make foam or faux leather or fabric look and behave like leather sometimes, but other times if you really want strong leather straps or raw edges or unlined something or a molded shape, leather is just easier. And it's just kind of made for certain things. So leather versus faux leather is a big topic. There's some stigma when it comes to using real leather, because it's an animal-based product, which is totally understandable. If you don't eat meat and you don't use animal products, don't use leather. There's definitely fake, like some really good quality faux substitutes out there in the world. But those are usually made of a petroleum byproduct and have a fabric backer. So they behave really differently. And in a way, they're not that much better for the world or the environment because they are petroleum based, they won't biodegrade. Whereas leather is a meat industry byproduct for the most part, and it will biodegrade eventually. So another thing that people bring up is that leather industry is a big pollutant. In the Industrial Revolution, it was a huge problem, but because of that and because people are much better about that stuff, the leather industry is highly regulated these days. So tanneries are held to a very high standard and aren't allowed to pollute and have to use better stuff. So leather's come a long way. And it has sometimes a bad rap because of that, but it doesn't super deserve it anymore, in my opinion. It's expensive. There's no two ways around that. A lot of people, including myself, if you have the time and the dedication, will search for leather to upcycle in secondhand stores. Old jackets or old upholstery is great for taking leather from if you want to upcycle it instead of buying new. But I'm also very picky. So if I need something specific for a costume, a lot of times I'll go out and I'll find it new. The best way is to shop in person, and we'll get into more about why that is in a bit. But the end of the day, I mix real leather and faux leather and fabric based on my budget, how long I want the costume to last, how authentic I want it to look, and how comfortable I want to be in it, because it definitely is more breathable and elastic than faux leathers. And if you're in costume all day, faux leather can get real sweaty. So I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about. It's gross, but that's one of the reasons I like leather. So now how to use it. There are basically limitless ways you can use it, but there are some specific garments that lend themselves well to leather, like outerwear, that's jackets, gloves, corsets, pants, vests, etc. Shoes are usually made from leather, and they're more comfortable when they are, even though there's synthetic options. So making boot covers from leather kind of seamlessly integrates your shoe with your boot cover. You can also kind of cut up shoes and glue and stitch leather right on top of it to modify an existing shoe. These the Star and Moon shoes here started off as like really basic like ballet slippers, and I added leather over the top and lacing along the sides and leather applique. to enhance them. Or if you really want brownie points with the judges and you're a very dedicated craftsperson, you make the whole shoe. And that's something that can be done with a lot of work and dedication. Accessories, belts, bags, random strappy bits from fantasy costumes, holsters, harnesses, etc. Those are all really great to make out of leather because you don't have to back it. You can punch holes in it. It's strong. It won't stretch out usually, and there's pretty easy ways to reinforce it. And it looks really real when you make something that's traditionally made in leather out of leather. Armor is an amazing thing to make in leather. You can use heavy leather and mold it. That's not something that I do. That's a whole nother set of tools and skills. I'm mostly a sewer, but I use leather for quilting, which is also an armor technique from the olden days. Quilted leather and just other leather protecting garments pop up a lot in costume. So whether it's something super heavy and molded or lightweight and just like this is a protective layer, that shows up a lot. And details, you can make a lot of cool things with leather as far as applique, binding it. It doesn't need to have finished edges. I use it to make bezels around gems because it can be strong enough to kind of hold those in place. Whip stitch lacing, quilting, whatever. There's a ton of techniques, and a few of them I'll be covering later in this presentation, a few of my favorites. This is an example of something I splurged on. This is Kanada's jacket from Akira, and he's obviously wearing a motorcycle jacket in the reference, and I really wanted it to be real leather, so I could wear it forever, basically, because I love it. This is a cow leather and a lamb leather lining. There's a few techniques here like quilting over the shoulders, painting on the back using leather paint, and antiquing using shoe creams to make this jacket look as authentic as possible and kind of lived in, like it would if it were in real life. His gloves too are leather, and it's something that I wear like day to day, not just in costume. So definitely not everything is made out of leather. Like when I did Vash the Stampede, there were a bunch of people that used leather or faux leather for his trench coat, but I was not willing to spend that much on that. It was very specific, but this one I did. But most of my costumes aren't primarily leather. On the left, for chic, it was more of a case of what looks best. Her corset is leather. The black parts of the armor are leather, but the blue parts are not. They're faux leather because it was the perfect color and a nice stiff texture. So parts of this costume are comfortable and breathable and parts aren't. And that's okay sometimes. You really just mix and match to what you need it to do. The center albus, his vest looked like it was tooled, which is when you emboss leather to have raised and lowered portions, like in traditional Western wear, you see it a lot. But he was also wearing a very form-fitting vest, which would be super uncomfortable to do in a veg tooled leather. So I faked this with what's called pyrography. I can't say that word, but it's when you burn it, basically. Use a hot tool, I use a soldering iron, but wood burning tools work really well to kind of burn your image into the leather. So that even though this vest is quite soft, it looks like a traditional tool leather. His gloves and gauntlets and all those belts and strappy holster bits are much stiffer leather that replicates traditional veg leather techniques a lot better, but I tend to fake those a lot because working with heavy veg tooling leather it's a lot harder and more time consuming. It's just not my thing. A lot of people do amazing stuff with it, and I'll touch on it a little bit. But the last image on this page is Link from Twilight Princess, and he has an arm guard in the beginning of the game that you don't know what it is. You never do when you're cosplaying. You just kind of choose something that looks like it might work and make it work. But in this case, I really wanted to use leather, and I chose a deer skin here because it's really soft and breathable, and it moves the way I wanted it to move. And I was able to do some techniques like that flower detail with trapunto, which I'll talk more about later. It's also got raw edge bias binding and leather lacing that has raw edges. And the belt that goes under his arm is a leather that's got raw edges and is much heavier. So I looked at a lot of traditional arm guards here, like things that would be worn under metal armor or just on their own, and tried to pull references from there and what it might actually be. So these costumes use just a tiny bit of leather, but in strategic ways. So Astrologian on the left has a lot of metallic leather elements. They didn't necessarily need to be leather, but what I like a lot about metallic leather is that it has a very high shine to it. It can be very smooth or have a little bit of texture. I chose a sheep leather that was metallic and has a little bit of texture just to give it a bit more depth. And I used the trapunto technique again to make raised shapes in the middle of the shapes. Like I said before, one of the best qualities of leather is that it can be left with raw edges and unlined. So on Vash, like his long glove is fake leather because I wanted it to be really stretchy. And I also didn't want to spend that much money on the amount of leather it would take to make that big long glove. But I did get a little bit of leather in there for the paler straps that go across because those I wanted to look more like they were heavy duty, tough leather. It's really not. It's kind of a soft leather that I again used foam behind to give it the qualities of a heavier leather. I think I mentioned before that I cheat a lot of these things where traditionally this would be like a super soft lamb leather for his glove and a veg leather that's thicker for those straps. I went with faux leather and a soft leather for the straps that I just beefed up to give that effect without the pain and suffering that it would cause. So it's all about how much work you want to put into it, really, at the end of the day. Okay, so now I've touched a bit about types of leathers in that little description, but I'm going to do a deep dive on what leather to use. The first thing you should look at is the weight. So leather thickness is called weight. Traditionally, it was measured in ounces, which actually has nothing to do with weight. Whereas textiles and threads will be weight, and it will be like, the amount of fabric that could fit in 1 pound or something. This has nothing to do with it. 1 ounce is 1/64th of an inch, which makes no sense to me. Even though a lot of traditional veg leather is measured that way. So if you go to like tandyleather.com or places like that, you'll see you'll see ounces used as a way to describe how thick it is. I would suggest looking up, there's like nice little cheat sheets online that show you how thick it is, like how thick is 1 ounce, how thick is 3 ounces. There's some good references out there. The more modern leathers and chrome tanned and garment weight stuff is measured in millimeters, which makes a lot more sense to me. If it's a very soft glove weight leather, it'll be like 0.5 millimeters. where a much more thick leather for armor can be 5 or 6 millimeters. And those are just much better measurements than 64ths of an inch. Very silly. So the pouch on the left here is about a 2 millimeter veg tan cow. It's unlined, so this leather is just so, it's heavy enough that it can hold its shape really well. And this is where tooling and molding comes in, because you can wet form leather of this weight to make shapes. The image on the right is quilted leather. So this is a sheep leather that's very thin, about 0.6 to 0.8 millimeters. And you need it this thin and soft to bring out three-dimensional details for quilting and trapunto. For gloves, it's great, and for other fine detailed garments like piping, etc. You can also, if this is what you have, this is all you have, I'll share a little bit about how to fake it, like I was talking about in the last slide, to make it look like a veg tan heavy leather, but sometimes it's just easier to get the heavy stuff and suffer through working with it, because that stuff you can't sew it on most machines. It has to be hand sewn, which is time consuming and physically painful occasionally. All right, so more about what leather to use. So we went over weight, which is the thickness, and then there's tannage, and this is how the skins are preserved. So there's two main types, vegetable tanning and chrome tanning. The image here is a veg tan leather that's naked. That means it doesn't have any dyes or finishes applied to it. This is what you'd get if you wanted to do tooling or dye it yourself or mold it and then paint it. It's kind of the base, and it's one of the oldest forms of tanning. So it uses vegetable tannins like bark and leaves to preserve the hides. And because of this, it has a firmer hand, and it also doesn't come in very vibrant colors. This is an example of finished veg leather. It's usually like a little bit more earth tones. It can patina, which means as it gets older, it will soften, and like oils from you touching it or water will mark it. It will scratch a lot easier. But this is what makes it beautiful too. You can tool it, get those nice designs in there, or just like scratch it up, because it's one of the older tanning processes. This is what old armor is made from mostly, and old shoes, old everything. So it looks really authentic. It takes a lot more to work with it because it's thicker and heavier. It's harder to sew on a machine because it's tougher. So it's great for that old-timey stuff though. So chrome tanning is a newer process that uses chemicals basically to make a much softer leather that can be dyed brighter and more vibrant colors. It's not suitable for molding or tooling, but it's much easier to sew with a machine, and it's better for garments and soft accessories. This is what I primarily use because it comes in a much wider range of colors and finishes, and you can sew it on a machine much easier. So I fake the look of veg tan leather a lot with this. So finishing means how it's treated after it's tanned. So dyeing, this is an example of like a hand stained leather that really is kind of organic looking. Pigmented leathers have basically a PU spray put on them. So it corrects any scars or wrinkles in the skin. The grain can also be corrected. These are probably an embossed grain so that the whole skin will be really even and easy to use. More natural naked skins are harder to use because they're natural. They come in a cow shape and they might have holes in them or scratches. or like areas with wrinkles. And if that's what you're going for, you just gotta lean into it and use those. If you don't want that look, ask for a pigmented or corrected leather, and it will be much smoother and you can use more of the skin more easily. Embossing is like it's super fun. This is embossed to look like tooling. Someone didn't go in and carve these skins. They use a big plate, like a big embossing plate to stamp the leather to look like it was tooled. They come in every design you can think of. A lot of great ones look like snake or they look like alligator. Um, and if you can't or don't want to use snake or alligator, but you want it to look like that, look for an embossed leather that does. The qualities are usually better, it's easier to work with, and it looks just as cool. Foil leather is another thing that I work with a ton because it's shiny and everyone wants shiny bits on a costume. And it comes in many colors and it works well. Like PU and PVC come in shiny things, fabric comes in shiny things, but leather can be super high gloss and it tends to bend and stretch better. Um, I'll show more of that in a bit. So that was tanning, weight, and finishing. And there's more. There's the size and quality of a skin, which means how big it is. Like cows are big, sheep are small. Oh, crap. Sorry, guys. All right. Cows are big, sheep are small. The animal it comes from. There's cows, they're really big. They're about 50 to 55 square feet. Skins are typically measured in square feet. A lot of online retailers will sell them just as a skin because it's easier to give like one flat price. But they all range, obviously. And if you're ordering from a tannery or at some place like Global Leathers, which is a much more specific leather retailer, they'll look at how big the skin actually is, and then you pay for how big the skin is. So you can buy a whole cow, you can buy half a cow, you can buy just sides or bellies. They, different areas of the animal is good for different things. For instance, there's horse leather, and if you get horse leather from the rump area and the back, it's like super tough. So people use that for motorcycle jackets or accessories and molding. But a sheep will be soft all over, and a cow can have different areas that have different qualities. But for the most part, tanneries try to make them pretty consistent or sell the parts of them that are consistent. Sheep is a much smaller animal. It's about 6 to 12 square feet, and it's much more elastic than cow. So it's kind of stretchy, which is great for wearing against your skin. It's my favorite for making leather garments and for quilting. And it can be shaved very thin. So it's good for gloves and fine details, and it's much easier to sew on home machines than cow is. If you get a thin cow, like you can get them, in 0.8 millimeters to 1.2, you can sew that on a home machine. But if you go heavier than that, you'll want an industrial or something. A sheep, you can pretty much always sew on a home machine. A deer is one of my favorite animals for leather. It's not as common. It's typically, they're still farm raised. They're not like wild deer, but they're more natural looking. They have a lot more green to them, and they're very plump, which will make sense. I got a video to show you. Sometimes describing it just doesn't make sense, but it's got a lot of volume to it. It's smaller than a cow, larger than a sheep, and it's kind of a traditional skin to use too. So for traditional armor or leather garments, like fringed leather jackets or moccasins or, like earthy like clothes, it's really good for that. And pig. So pig is not super common. There's kind of papery and they tear easily, but you can use some great effects on them, like metallic foils, and they're typically cheaper, like a lot cheaper than the other leathers. So if you're on a budget, you want leather, you want it to be like metallic and shiny, look for pig leather. And then we looked at some embossed stuff. There's leather with hair on it. There's straight up fur, exotics, suede, perforated, woven. The list goes on and on. It's just mind-boggling a little bit, but if you get the chance to go into a store that sells leather, that's the best way to learn about leather, is to go in and touch. It's the same as fabric. Like I don't like shopping for fabric unless I can touch it. Um, uh, I think more online retailers will send you cuttings of leather if you're shopping. If you have to shop online, especially these days, you have to shop online for the most part. They can send you cuttings so you can see what it's like before you pony up for it. So next I'm going to show you a little video that kind of, it just demonstrates these qualities a little bit better in motion, essentially. So here we go. This is a cowhide that you can tell has been chrome tanned because of how soft and supple it is. It's about 1.2 mm thick, which is pretty thin for cow leather, but it will be great for a garment. It's a pretty smooth finish, not too pebbly, and a natural color that's probably a mix of aniline dyes and pigments. This is an example of veg tanned cowhide. You can see already it's a little bit stiffer, even though it's not that much thicker than the chrome tan. One of the most interesting features of veg tan is that it will sing to you if you scrunch it up. So you can hear that characteristic scrunching noise. Another way to tell a veg tan is that it will scratch. And if you get it wet, those scratches will darken. So this is why veg tan is good for tooling. This is the beginning of tooling and molding leathers and the characteristics that you want it to have. It will also develop a really good patina over time, which is great if you want it to look antique, but not so great if you want it to look crisp and new. You can also see it's got a bunch of fat wrinkles in it, so this is a really naked, natural veg tan hide. This is a sheepskin that you can see is extremely soft. It's a little bit elastic, which makes it good for quilting. But very thin, probably 0.8 millimeters, and it's got a very smooth pressed surface, which is definitely pigmented and corrected a little bit for an even color. This is a deer skin, and you can see it's a little bit more naked. You can see some fat wrinkles and grain to it. It's extremely plump and soft, which is why I love deer so much. It's very elastic, almost spongy, almost as thick as the cow, probably 1.2, 1.4, but extremely lightweight, and it's got a great volume. It's super comfortable to wear, and one of my favorites. This is pig leather, and it's been treated with metallic foil tipping to give that shine. You can hear it's more papery and crispy than other leathers. It's very thin because it's a split, which also unfortunately means that it will tear very easily, which is a characteristic of pig leather. But they come in super great finishes and they're not very expensive. This is an example of a cowhide that's been embossed to look like a reptile, probably an alligator. It's also definitely chrome tanned because of how soft it is, but it's got a great waxy glaze to it.
It's a big probably one too, but it's very cool. I can't wait to find a use for this one. Very fantasy looking. Another of my favorite leather textures is a nubuck finish. This is the top grain of a cow that's been buffed to give it a really velvety finish. So it's a cousin to suede, but not so hairy. You can kind of draw on it, so it gives a great texture to costumes and it's very soft. Here is a laser perforated sheepskin. It's a very soft garment weight, and you can see how you can get amazing detail and crisp, clean lines in leather without having a fabric backing show through or anything like that. Last but not least, this is a python skin. You can see it's got some holes in it, and it is python shaped. It was hard to see in the other skins, but working with the natural shape and qualities of each piece of leather is one of the challenges and beauties of working with real leather.
All right, so that's a whole lot of information on types of leather. It's a little overwhelming. Like I said, go shopping, see if you can touch leather and all the types of it. Ask questions of the people selling it, and you'll learn as you go, essentially. Experimentation is the best. So if you want to sew leather, what do you need to have? Leather needles, obviously. You can get them for your machine. These are machine sewing needles. They have a really pointy tip, and it's like a blade almost. It pierces the leather instead of punching through it. So it makes it a little easier for your machine. If you want to hand sew leather, that's fine too. These are Glover's needles. They have a very pointed blade shaped tip also that pierces the leather instead of punching through it. These are also very good at piercing your skin. So invest in a good thimble and be prepared. Needle nose pliers are great because even though they're very sharp, if you're sewing with a thicker leather, you're going to need some extra help. And then there's harness needles. These are blunt at the tip and a little longer. This is for traditional veg leather sewing. You use a wax thread and you kind of sew with 2 needles to go in and out. It's a very strong technique and a very slow technique. It's super traditional, it looks super traditional, and it's incredibly long lasting and long wearing. I've done it a few times. It's phenomenal. You can absolutely talk to it if you're competing and you're like, I hand sewed this and it looks amazing. But if you're in a time crunch, that's not so necessary. You do need polyester thread or bonded nylon thread. Cotton thread can dissolve with the tanning process of leather, basically, can eat it away. So you need to have something stronger. A thicker, heavier weight thread, thicker thread is better. It won't break as often. Sometimes thinner threads will break. So you should go as thick as your machine can take. If you're sewing by a machine, sometimes home sewing machines do not like using upholstery thread, but experiment, see what works. If you're hand sewing, waxed thread is awesome. It looks really classic, like harnesses and saddles. They're traditionally hand sewn. So hand sewing, it looks awesome. Again, it's really slow. And you do need a powerful sewing machine or strong fingers. You don't need to go bonkers though. Like if you have an industrial machine, that's super awesome. They can sew through whatever. Oh man, I messed that up, sorry. I don't have an industrial machine to sew leather. This is what I use to sew on my leather. It's a FAF Select line machine, and it's mechanical. It really will sew through almost whatever. Not really heavy veg leather stuff, but it served me really well. And one of the best parts is it has a built-in walking foot, which we'll talk more about later, but super helpful. And you just kind of have to test the limits of your machine and see what it will do. But don't go rush out and buy a new machine. If you want to start sewing leather, just start with something soft and maybe a little easier like sheep, and then work your way up to cow and then go from there. You do need sharp scissors, a knife, and a metal ruler so that you don't cut through your ruler. This is also showing a whetstone, which is really important. You gotta keep your tools sharp. Sharp tool is a safe tool. So I sharpen this knife pretty much after every few cuts. Contact cement and rubber cement are super helpful. It's basically like basting fabric. So the stuff on the left, the EcoWeld, is a water-based contact cement. I think it's got latex in it, and it's much safer to use inside. You still want ventilation. You still want to be careful. The stuff on the right is super toxic. The list of warnings on it goes on forever. It'll kill you, but it works really well. So if you want to use that, make sure you have a respirator, make sure you're well ventilated. But it's fantastic. I use both of them extensively with sewing leather. Basically, you put a really thin layer on both sides of the leather and you stick it down and it won't move. So you can sew through it a lot easier. Another option is binder clips. You got to use these instead of pins because pins will leave permanent holes in your leather. But if you don't want to use glue at all, you can clip your seams with binder clips. I would highly recommend glue though. That water-based contact cement from Tandy Leather is a super great product. I like it a lot. So that's what you need to have. And what's nice to have is a skiving knife. This is a tool. They are a bunch of different styles, like shorter ones and ones with chisel tips, ones that scoop away leather. But the point of these is to shave away your seam allowances so they're not so bulky. You can also shave edges so when you fold it, it's not super thick. And joining ends of straps and kind of joining leather in general. If you skive the sides of both of them and glue them together, sometimes you can make a belt look seamless. So you can make a really long strap from multiple lengths of leather if you skive the ends and glue them together really sneakily. It's great. Hole punch, super helpful in any crafting situation. Probably a lot of you have this already, but for leather, it's extra good. You can use it for making holes for buckles or for weaving things through and setting snaps and rivets, etc. This is a bone folder. It's used in bookmaking and leatherworking mostly. You can use that little hook on the left side to fold edges, which is where it gets its name. It kind of scoops the seam allowance over on itself. You use a pointed edge to burnish things or turn edges or just like kind of make, in veg leather, you can kind of draw with it in a limited way. A hammer and mallet are something that is mostly helpful for tooling, but it also is great if you want to flatten your seam allowance. Basically, you just whack at your leather until it's flat. So those are helpful. Swivel knives and embossing tools. These are for tooling. I don't do much of it, but this is what you need to do that thing. This is Tandy's hand sewing kit. This is what I bought when I wanted to sew some heavy leather. It's pretty basic, but does the job. A wood burning tool is great if you want to do that tooled look on leather without tooling. Another word of caution, a lot of leather does use chemicals to tan it. So ventilate. The vapors that come off of burned leather are dangerous. Make sure you have a respirator, make sure you're well ventilated. Bonded leather. This is basically like interfacing for leather. It's a little hard to find. You can find it on Etsy or at specialty retailers, but it's basically a leather cardboard. You can get it in different weights. And this is what you want to use if you want to fake veg tan leather. Like if you have a really soft leather and you want it to be stiffer, glue it to this stuff and it'll be stiffer. And there's a million pieces of hardware, rivets, snaps, buckles, D-rings, O-rings, the list goes on. Some of it's functional, some of it's decorative, but you can buy specifically for a project or have a nice little collection like I do and hopefully find what you need in it. Okay, machine sewing tips. You need a strong machine, and the longer the stitch length, the better, because if you have a short stitch length, it'll perforate your skin and it's possible to tear the leather along the seam. So most home sewing machines are about 5 or 6 mm, and that's pretty good if you have a heavy thread with it too. Use your glue and clips. We already went over why. It's basically like basting and pinning. Don't backstitch, tie off your threads, like pull them through. And if you're using a polyester or nylon thread, you can melt the tail ends after tying them to make a really clean finish. Stitching holes are permanent in leather, so don't mess up, which is funny because you will inevitably mess up, but testing a lot is the best thing to do, and just go slow and be careful. Reduce bulk when you can. This is true of sewing fabric as well, but you have to do it a little differently for leather. But you can skive it, you can flat fell it, and do some other neat tricks that you can't do with fabric to make it thinner. Use a walking foot or a rolling foot or a Teflon foot. Most machines, even industrials, don't really like letting leather glide through. So this is Pfaff's walking foot. This is what it looks like in action, and it's built into the machine. So I don't really use a special foot, but if you have a roller foot or a Teflon foot, that works good too. Now we're going to get into techniques. That's basically like what the leather is, what you need, and these are just some things that make your leather pretty. Quilting is probably my most favorite thing. This is channel quilting, and it's just straight lines sewn a line. All quilting is basically 3 layers. There's the upper layer, which is leather in this case, the middle, which is a padding. So there's like quilt batting, you can use EVA, you can use spongy foams. And for background garments, I use muslin or liner or whatever. This is quilting done by an embroidery machine. So it's super detailed, and I would never do this by hand, but some people could. If you're really good at free motion sewing, you can do this on a normal machine, like a normal home sewing machine, but this was done on an embroidery machine. This is just basic diamond-shaped quilting. This is a few different techniques of quilting, but obviously I love it. I use it a lot. It's used a lot in fashion and historical sewing too. So it pops up a lot in costumes, and I lean into it. So this is what the embroidery machine looks like in action. It's sped up, so it's not actually this fast, but it is this precise and cool to watch. It's really neat. I need to do some more with that eventually. I've kind of tested the waters of it. You should definitely use a soft leather or your machine will choke probably. Trapunto. So this is very similar to quilting, but it's a placed design. So this flower is trapunto. These swirls on Astrologian are trapunto, and it's just a part of the design is quilted instead of all of it. This edge is done with cording. That's also trapunto, which is an Italian word basically for quilting. Here's the Astrologian skirt again. I used this technique a ton on this costume. It's on her belt, it's on her skirt, it's on her bodice. And I do have a quick like work in progress photo set showing how it's done. So here's the finished product. So it's a metallic sheep leather with EVA padding and bonded leather backer. These are the EVA shapes. It's about 2 mm thick. You glue that to the salpa, bonded leather backer. So that's the leather cardboard. It gives it a good base to sit on. You add more glue it to the back of your leather. And then when you flip it over, you press around the edges So the glue will hold your leather down around the edges of the EVA. You stitch around it. This is clearly a different project, but same concept. I use a zipper foot to get my needle and thread as close to the edge of the padding as possible. And this is the finished product. Applique and raw edges. Leather is great for this because you don't have to worry about it fraying. You don't have to worry about turning it. You can make really detailed designs. And here's it's antiqued. This is what it looked like before it was antiqued. You can see there's bias binding and applique and the bezels I was talking about, basically the thing that's holding that oval gem in the middle of the necklace. That's leather. This is Link again, a closer view of that flower shape, but also all this bias binding and leather lacing is raw edge. Vash's glove, again, those are raw edge. And they're also edge stained. You can go with a darker color to really like amp up the details on your costume, which is the next thing I'm going to be talking about, is antiquing and painting. Here's Link again. You can see it's kind of like smudgy looking, right? That's shoe cream. So this is something you can buy at footwear supply stores like a cobbler. It's a cream that often has color added to it. There's neutral ones, but you can also get brown, black, olive red, whatever. And when you rub it into your leather, it conditions it and stains it. So it's a really natural look as opposed to paint, which is a much more graphic, vibrant look. So this is painted on leather. Angelus leather paint is probably my favorite product. It's really vibrant, it goes on easily, and it flexes with your leather, so it won't crack and peel off. It's a super great paint in general, but it's spectacular on leather. Pretty much any leather, as long as you prime it well. Those are just some leather painting projects. All right, here's the word I can't say, pyrography. Pyrography. This is using a heat tool. I just had a soldering iron, which is what I used to solder the runes into the edge of this leather. So instead of tooling it with an embossing tool and a hammer, I just kind of burn them in. Here it is in action. This is a test swatch, and this is the finished vest. Burn designs in leather. Again, ventilate well, don't kill yourself. The fumes are toxic, be careful. So veg leather techniques. Gonna go over this real quick because this is not my forte, but this is kind of one of the only projects that I completely hand stitched. This is a pretty heavy leather harness, gun belt and sword scabbard holder. And you can see that it doesn't have any backer. It's all really natural. There's some edge grooving, like a heat embossed looking thing, just to make it look like it's the real deal. And it is. This is probably the closest thing to a real deal that I've made. This is a little bit more fake. This is more costumey. It's kind of, again, replicating harness, straps, etc. But it was a softer leather that I used the bonded leather inside. So it's not actually a really heavy veg leather. This one is fake. This one is real. I had to hand sew this, which means punching each hole with an awl and then using your harness needles to stitch each stitch. It's very strong. It looks really classic. It's a little bit molded. You can see there's like a bit of a shape to the back of that bag. It was really fun. It's really slow. It looks great. It takes forever. I prefer to fake it, but you can do this if this is your thing. And it's kind of a thing that you can only do with leather. So lean into that if that's what you want to do. Last but not least is a list of resources. So leather is pretty specific. You don't really find much of it at Joann's, but Tandy leather isn't that rare. There's a lot of stores. You might have to drive for a while to get to one, but they also have a great website. They're much more focused on tooling and traditional leather work, saddles and heavy leather stuff. If you want fashion leather, Global Leathers in New York City is my favorite. They've got a great website and they'll send you cuttings if you ask them nice. Mood Fabrics, also in New York and LA, has a pretty extensive selection of leather, fabric too. It's a great place to shop, but they've got more and more leather these days, and some of it's very cool, like very fashion, a lot of embossed stuff. It's expensive. Don't go to Mood Fabrics if you are on a tight budget. Go to Etsy or eBay or Craigslist. You can really get lucky. And like I was saying earlier, if you want to upcycle leather, go to Goodwill, go to Salvation Army and look for leather there. Buckle Guy and Ohio Travel Bag are both places to get hardware. They're really more for the buckles and the rivets and the tools. You can get more equipment there, like the knives that you need, or I don't know, there's tons of equipment that you can use, but that's good. And then if you want to read further about leather, leatherdictionary.com is a spectacular resource. If you want to go back and be like, crap, she talked about chrome leather, but I didn't understand it. Go there, just type that in and it will give you a really great article on chrome tanned leather and why you should use it, etc. It's a very cool website. Leatherworker.net/forum. This is a forum for leather workers, and it is an incredible resource. Again, it's like, I'd say more towards people that do tooling and heavyweight leather craft rather than garments, but a lot of it still applies to costumes and fashion garments as well. So go check that out if you're interested in such a thing. And that's the end. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to see if there's any questions, because I talked a lot and real fast. So I hope there's questions. Let me see. I'm going on to the Twitch stream now and shoot your questions at me. We've got like, I don't know.
I think they've been pretty enraptured with you so far, but I haven't actually seen a question pop up yet.
Being put to sleep by my droning, probably, but...
I choose to think that they're taking notes.
Oh, yeah, maybe that's it. They're very studious. It's possible.
I mean, I'm pretty sure you caught at least one person off guard when you said cow-shaped at one point. So. Cow-shaped.
I mean, yeah.
It's accurate. It's what it is. It's just, it feels like a physics joke. So.
Yeah. Well, they're really, I should have put a picture of what a cow hide looks like in this presentation, because they're really, I don't know. They're cow-shaped, but if a cow is flattened,
yeah,
I guess.
It's like a T pose, but it's more of an H pose.
Yeah, I mean, it's specific. It takes some creative cutting. It's definitely not like cutting fabric. You have to do some tricky stuff. And you can't mark it the same way as fabric either. Gel pens are great for marking leather, especially if it's pigmented. Those rub off pretty easy. But otherwise, you mark it on the back and you got to make sure that it looks good on the front too. But yeah, let me check the chat.
Yep, you got a few questions now.
Oh, okay, let's see. What is the hardest thing you encountered when beginning to work with leather? Definitely making it go through a machine. I think when I first started working with leather, I didn't know much about the qualities of it and what makes something easier to sew or harder to sew. And I abused the heck out of my machine. So when you're going shopping for your first leather project, if you can shop, look for chrome tan leather, or if you're going thrifting, look for the properties that chrome tan leather has, because it'll be much more forgiving when you're trying to sew it. And also use glue and clips, because you don't want your leather shifting all over the place. It gives you a headache. Let's see. I took a bag of work in progress in pre-COVID and started trying to figure out what I was even doing. Yeah. Is it a leather bag? You working on a leather bag? It's a big project. Let's see. Cotton Candy Wizard. Are there any projects or techniques that you did once or twice and decided never again? A lot of them. I think I do something new every time with cosplay. But hand-sewn leather is not a never again thing, but it's definitely like, it has to be a really special project to make me do it again. It's very slow. It's a lot of handwork, so you're gonna have sore fingers. It's gonna look awesome, hopefully. I mean, if you're careful, it'll look awesome. But it's definitely one of those things I was like, oh, this isn't really for me. I guess I'm too impatient in some ways. In some ways, I'm very patient with craft projects, but hand sewing and tooling, not really one of them, unfortunately. Some people are incredibly patient for that stuff, and the results are incredible, but that's kind of one of them. I'm trying to think of another example of ones I did once or twice and never again. Not with leather. Most leather I really like, and I want to do more of. Like, I think embroidering leather is something that I want to do more of. So that's like the opposite of a one and done. I realized that my embroidery machine can do it, so I'm gonna try to do more embroidered leather projects, which is harder because, as I was saying, it like perforates the leather and can tear it. So I'm excited about that. Okay, what am I doing with my leather scraps? Oh, they're all in a closet. Everything's in a bin. Leather, you can use every little scrap. So even if it's like this really moth-eaten looking thing, like I used the heck out of it for a project, I do save the scraps until they're like really gone. But for applique, you can do like little pieces, little details with the scraps. You can patchwork them. You can do a lot of stuff with leather scraps. So don't throw your scraps away. It's expensive. You don't want to throw that stuff in the trash. And also, it's really great for using little pieces of. Have I worked with any good faux products? Yes, but it's really hit or miss. Like a lot of the places like Joann's or Mood, they're called jobbers, which means they buy up stock from designers or from other places. So I'll find a really great faux leather quality once, and then I'll never find it again. So if you find a good faux leather, buy it. Like, buy more than you need. That's me. I always buy more than I need, but it's a little bit harder to find reliable faux leather in my experience. It's easier to find real leather in reliable qualities. Do you think some of the thinner leathers could be used with a die cut machine like Cricut and make small detailed cuts? Yes, I've tried it once or twice, and you definitely can. You have to like stick it down pretty good because it'll want to wiggle around, because leather does have a little bit of that elasticity and movement to it. So I'm still experimenting more with the best way to stick it to the mat and make it go. But I've been playing with cutting fringe with the Cricut, however you say it, because cutting fringe is like incredibly tedious. It can be done, but I would love if my robot would do it. And applique too would be super good on a Cricut. So I think if you use something that was a little stiffer, like pig leather, I was like kind of hating on it, but that would be a really good instance to use it. If you're doing applique and you're sticking it to something else and you want really detailed cuts with raw edge and a metallic leather, I think that would be an amazing place to use it. Are there any dream projects with leather that you're still figuring out or too intimidated to start yet? Yeah, this goes back to the veg leather stuff and tooling. This is like a pipe dream cosplay that I haven't figured out in many ways, but I want to do a centaur from Fantasia, but like a battle version. Because there's this weird like myth about the mayors of Thrace, and they eat people. So they're horses that eat people. And I'm like, oh, that'd be so cool if it was like just kind of like a badass warrior centaur. So I need to figure out how to make a centaur body that has the physics of a horse first. And then I want to totally kit her out in like leather armor and like harness and stuff like that. So that's a pipe dream costume.
Sounds awesome.
That may never happen, but it's like
that's what makes it a dream. That makes sense.
Right, that's what makes it a dream. Sometimes I just lie there and I think, oh, how cool I have to start small. Start with like the feet, like how am I gonna
You
make
have to
hooves?
build a horse
Let's
one
start
piece at
there.
a time.
And then eventually, exactly, yeah, one little piece at a time. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes it takes just a year of planning and accumulating skills. So I probably should do a little bit more veg leather projects to build those skills if I ever want to do that. But
Awesome. Yeah.
I think that's yeah, my next one.
I think
And
that's probably a good question to wrap on since we got to talk about
totally.
building a horse. So I feel like we came full circle on the topic.
I guess so.
Obviously, yeah, you by all means continue conversing in the chat. I just
Okay.
want to get ready for Scone's bit next so I can make sure the sound works at the very beginning this time.
Absolutely.
So, I would like
Thank
to.
you so much.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for telling us all about how to use a cow to make a costume. That's amazing.
No problem.
I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in person. That'll be great.
I know, me too.
I miss all people, but I also miss you. So
It's the truth. I'll see you next summer.
Alrighty. Okay, everyone, I'm
Alright.
going to put the schedule back up for a minute, but don't wander too far. This is a good time to go get a drink. Maybe find a notebook if you want to take old-fashioned notes. Have fun. All right, so we'll be right back.